Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rising Sign Astrology. Today, we're diving into a part of astrology that often gets overlooked, but does add, some serious depth to your chart, in my opinion. And this was actually a topic that's been suggested by a few folks within the comments of various videos. And this one is about, the major asteroids and fixed stars. So, if you've ever wondered what names like Juno or Ceres or even Algol mean when they show up in your reading or in your chart, then this video is for you, right? I'm going to break down some major asteroids as well as the most talked about fixed stars in astrology, right? What they represent and ultimately why they matter. So whether you're new to astrology or just, intermediate level, looking for some deeper understanding into these areas, I think this is going to be a helpful starting point or guide to working with some of these asteroids and fixed stars and the details and meanings behind them that I think a lot of people don't investigate or miss or just, overlook. And if you enjoy the content and want to hear more, please subscribe to the channel or hit the bell button so that you're alerted whenever I post a new video. And if you do like what you hear and find this interesting or helpful or educational, please give a thumbs up or drop a comment. It really does help with the algorithm and let other astrology lovers know that this, that this content will resonate with them. Okay, so let's dive in and get started. When you're first learning astrology, most people focus on the major planets, and that makes a ton of sense. You're learning what the houses mean, what the significance of the different planets and celestial bodies are, right? Focusing on the moon or the sun and Venus and so on. And that's the solid foundation that you need. That's what you should do. But once you have that down, you're going to start to notice other things and other names showing up in your chart, right? Things like Juno or Algol, like I've mentioned, and these aren't planets, right? But they're impactful. And what they are asteroids or fixed stars. And while they can be ignored at times, they actually add a pretty big layer of interest and detail, in my opinion, and just additional layers of insight into your chart. So asteroids like Ceres or Juno or Vesta or Pallas are smaller celestial bodies that tend to represent more specific or even nuanced aspects of your life, right? Like how you nurture or how you commit, even how you serve others or solve problems in your day-to-day life. And while they're not going to override typically the influence of a major planet, they do add some level of important context. So think of them as sort of fine-tuning the story or, sprinkles on the sundae, if you would. An example of this could be like your Venus showing how you love or your partner, but like something like Juno could then add additional layer and show maybe what you need from a long-term partner in some way, right? And they each have their own role in your story and your life. And fixed stars are similar but a little different, right? They are actual stars in the sky, like Algol or Regulus or Spica, and they have powerful symbolic meanings. And while they don't move through, your chart the same way planets do, they can be conjunct to your personal planets and powerful points within your chart. And when they tend to amplify or color a part of your chart that has very specific energy, right? Sometimes protective, sometimes intense, sometimes challenging, all depending upon the specific fixed star and what it represents. Now, these points, right, these fixed stars, these asteroids, they also matter in transits, right? So when a planet is triggering a sensitive asteroid or fixed star within your chart, it can bring up experiences that are tied to that point. And if you're not paying attention to these smaller players within the game, you might miss the full meaning of what's going on. And this video is going to walk you through some of that. And it's not all of them, but it is some of the more important ones, in my opinion, to know. And I'll get into, what they mean, where you could find them in your chart in some instances, and why they matter. And I'm going to walk through it, with establishing a foundation, giving you a surface level understanding of not only what they are, their origin, the mythology, but then also, an example or two of how they can manifest in a particular chart. It likely won't be specific to your chart, but you start to see thematically how they influence, a placement for you. So like I said, this is not a deep dive, but it should be helpful for both beginners and probably intermediate astrology lovers. And honestly, in my opinion, once you learn this layer and the importance of some of these, you're never going to read a chart or look at your own chart in the same way again. So with that said, let's get into the list. Okay, let's talk Chiron. So Chiron isn't technically an asteroid. It's a small celestial body that has traits of both an asteroid but also a comet. But in astrology, it's often grouped with asteroids. And Chiron represents the wounded healer, right? It's the part of you that carries a core emotional wound, often from early life or something deeply internal. And this wound may never fully disappear, but it becomes a source of wisdom and compassion and healing for others when you face it head on. Now, in mythology, Chiron was known as the wise centaur that was famous for his skills in teaching and healing and mentoring heroes. Ironically, despite his talents, he couldn't heal himself from a wound that he suffered. And this story is really at the heart of Chiron's meaning in astrology. It's where you feel damaged or rejected or just different, but also where you have the potential to guide and support others through that same terrain who are suffering from that same type of wound. Now, in your birth chart, Chiron is often where you feel the most vulnerable and where your pain may shape not only your confidence, but also your self-worth, even how you show up in relationships. But it also shows your healing gifts, right? Where you naturally help others. And not by being perfect, but by being real. So as you confront and work through your own pain, you end up becoming a source for deep understanding for other people dealing with similar or same issues. And it makes Chiron a bridge between pain and purpose. Now, to help bring this to life, an example could be an individual who has Chiron in their fifth house, right? They may carry wounds around creativity or self-expression or being seen or being celebrated. Maybe they were discouraged from showing off earlier in life or felt like their talents just didn't matter. And they may have craved recognition but feared the judgment that came with it. And it would have led them to either hide their gifts or maybe overcompensate by chasing validation. And over time, this person would become someone who helps others feel seen and feel confident. Especially, folks within that fifth house spectrum, children, artists, right? People struggling with self-esteem. And the healing gift would come from teaching others how to shine despite their fears. So you can see how this plays out. Another example could be someone who had Chiron in the sixth house, right? So this would be a person who may have a wound tied to not feeling good enough, or feeling burdened by responsibility, or just feeling like they had to be overly responsible earlier in their life, or someone that was very anxious, almost chronically, about their health. So maybe they felt like they had to be perfect in order to be accepted. Or they internalized the belief that being useful was their only value. Again, right? Sixth house Virgo themes. And they might struggle with overworking or being overly critical of themselves. But once they start to heal from this pattern, they become a very powerful guide for others dealing with similar themes like stress or burnout or, a disconnect between the mind and the body axis. And they'd be the kind of person who'd be able to then help others heal through wellness and compassionate service and their own experience of having gone through that. So even though Chiron doesn't rule a sign or act like a traditional planet or celestial body, it plays a pretty big role in your chart, right? It shows where you may feel broken, but also where your greatest gifts lie. So ultimately, the way to get over this is to stop hiding your wound, right? To start working on it. Because when you do, you're not just going to heal yourself, but you become a force for healing that same wound in other people's lives. And that's sort of Chiron. Next up, we have Black Moon Lilith. And this isn't an asteroid, and it's also not a planet, right? It's actually a mathematical point in the moon's orbit. It's basically the point where the moon is furthest from the Earth. And in astrology, Lilith represents your raw, instinctual, and often repressed feminine power. It's where you refuse to be tamed, where you reject societal expectations, and where you may feel shamed or exiled or even misunderstood for simply being yourself. Now, in mythology, Lilith is based on a figure of folklore who was said to be Adam's first wife, right? Who was created equal to him, but who refused to be submissive and left the Garden of Eden rather than obey Adam. Because of this, she became the symbol of the untamed feminine, right? Of rebellion, and also in some ways suppressed truth. And in astrology, Black Moon Lilith shows where you might hold deep anger or shame or even defiance. And also where you have the power to liberate yourself and others by facing what's been buried there. So in your chart, Lilith shows where you don't tend to play nice, right? Where you're unwilling to compromise your core truth, especially when it comes to themes of autonomy or sexuality, power, or emotional honesty. And this point can show up as a place where you've been silenced or rejected in the past, but also where you can reclaim that with fierce self-respect. And Lilith energy can be magnetic, but also very polarizing. It's that type of energy that will say or do what other people won't say or do. So to bring this to life, one example could be having Black Moon Lilith in your fourth house. So if you had this placement, you may have been someone who experienced early family dynamics where your emotional needs were dismissed or ignored or manipulated in some way, leading you to suppress your vulnerability or emotional expression. You might feel shame around needing comfort, so you bury it. But over time, you'd reclaim this by becoming fiercely protective of your space and your emotional boundaries. You may reject traditional ideas of family and instead decide to create your own unique version of home, right? One where your unique emotional truth is honored and not suppressed. Now, another example could be having Black Moon Lilith in your eighth house. And this would bring deep intensity around sexuality and power, and emotional depth. So you would have been someone that was shamed or punished for being too intense or too curious or too sexual in some way, right? And as a result, you might keep those parts of yourself hidden or use power and seduction to stay in control of the situation. But once you would start to embrace this energy without shame, then you become someone who helps others face taboo topics or emotional trauma, and go through deep transformation. And you wouldn't be someone that'd be afraid to go like deep into those eighth house themes, but you'd have to do it on your terms. So you can see that while Black Moon Lilith isn't a planet, it does mark a very powerful psychological zone in your chart. It tells you where you're wired to push back against control or reject roles that don't fit and reclaim a part of yourself that was once shamed or silenced. Right? If you felt like you were too much for people in a specific area of your chart, or felt like hiding that part of yourself was the only way to survive, then Lilith there really shows that path forward in terms of owning that energy instead of having to dim it or to hide it. Let's talk Algol, right? Algol is one of the most infamous fixed stars in astrology. It's not a planet, it's not an asteroid. It sits in the constellation Perseus, and its name comes from the Arabic Algol, meaning the demon or evil spirit or Satan's head. And in the sky, Algol marks the eye of Medusa, the mythological Gorgon whose head was severed by Perseus. Because of that, Algol has long been associated with themes of losing one's head or loss of control, intense raw power that's both destructive but also transformational. And yes, themes of decapitation as well. Traditionally, Algol was seen as a dangerous star, like the most malefic. It's linked to violence and chaos and misfortune. And like I said, even beheading, whether that's literal or symbolic. But in modern astrology, Algol is probably a little reinterpreted. And some folks, instead of reading it as purely bad, which I tend to be more on that side of the fence, some folks understand it as just a symbol of overwhelming emotional intensity or like a rage that can't be suppressed, right? Now, Algol is also considered a wealth star because it represents those themes, right? Raw, intense power and the ability to not only survive but rise through chaos. So while traditionally feared, its placement can signify someone who draws strong public attention and influence, right? And gains wealth through resilience or through controversy or just like sheer presence alone. And it doesn't bring easy success, but when it's harnessed, the energy of Algol can drive ambition and visibility and, financial strength born from overcoming chaos and owning one's own power. And in your chart or anyone's chart, Algol becomes active when it's conjunct a planet or it's at a specific angle or aspect. And when this happens, it doesn't mean you're doomed. It means you carry a form of energy that can feel extreme or uncontainable in some way, right? It's an energy that can feel threatening to others if it's not handled consciously. This is the energy of someone who may have been metaphorically beheaded at some point, right? Punished for being too powerful or too vocal or too sexual, right? Like punished for being uncontrollable in some form or fashion. And now you have to learn to reclaim that power without being consumed by it. And again, right, it's also linked to alcohol, Algol. And we obviously know how alcohol can make one lose their heads in a variety of ways. And Algol's symbolism of losing your head can show up literally in some instances, right? Whether that's accidents or migraines or some form of trauma involving the head. But more often, I'd say it shows up metaphorically, right? Think emotional breakdowns, public humiliation, losing your cool, things like that. But it also gives a unique ability to walk through fire and confront, harsher realities and emerge more powerfully when you face it consciously. Now, in people's charts, I've personally seen this manifest as, migraines or intense head related symptoms, not decapitation so much. But that's me personally and probably thankfully as well. But, there are examples throughout history that people, oftentimes, astrologers like to cite. One is the Algol connection to the death of Jane Mansfield, right? She was a very famous Hollywood actress during the 50s and 60s. And she died tragically in a car crash pretty early in life. She was in her early 30s, I think. And in the accident, her car collided with the back of a tractor trailer and it killed her. But in the process of doing so, her head was actually injured and crushed to the point of decapitation. So some astrologers like to note that Jane Mansfield had Algol in conjunction with her natal Chiron, right, an indicator of trauma. But it was also opposite her natal Hygeia, an asteroid associated with health, natally. And an opposition between Hygeia and that Algol Chiron conjunction can suggest a conflict between protection and chaos and destruction. At the time of her death, her transiting ascendant was also opposite Algol. That would most likely amplify the event's symbolism and timing, right? Especially given the violent and highly visible nature of her passing. Because the ascendant in transit represents the face or just the immediate physical and environmental experience at any given moment. It rules how an event is embodied or appears physically. And it can act like a trigger or spotlight within timing. So when transiting ascendant forms a tight opposition to a really highly charged point like Algol, it can activate the energy there, bring it into a real world expression, such as I described, especially if that point is already sensitive within the chart. Another one is Nicole Simpson, who had her natal sun conjunct Algol in her chart. And most people know that she unfortunately had an injury to her neck so bad that her head was essentially decapitated. But anyway, this has gone in a dark direction, so let's pivot and bring it back to some more realistic examples to help illustrate and bring it to life. And one example of that could be like having your moon conjunct Algol in your 10th house. And if you had this, then maybe you experienced very public emotional exposure or loss in terms of reputation, or being judged too harshly in the public sphere for how you express your feelings, right? Maybe your emotions, the moon, were labeled too much, or you were scapegoated in the career sector in some way because of this. And, because of this and over time, you'd learn that your emotional truth is powerful, but it needs to be owned and not hidden or suppressed. Another example of this actually is Donald Trump, right? He survived an assassination attempt last year in 2024, And many astrologers, most notably Laura Lothian at Lunatic Astrology, who, in my opinion, might be the very best astrologer on YouTube, um, basically called this. And what happened was right around the time of this event, this rally in Pennsylvania, I'm sure as everyone knows, there's a really rare and powerful alignment between Mars and Uranus conjunct his midheaven, where Algol sat in his chart. And this very literally almost led to him losing his head. So while Algol has a dark reputation, which I think in many cases is well earned, it doesn't always 100% mean that you're doomed or it's dangerous or something bad is going to happen. From a more theoretical standpoint, it probably means that you're wired to deal with extreme energy or deep emotional truth or suppressed power in some ways, not only within yourself, but also others. And if you have Algol in your chart, at a sensitive point or a sensitive conjunction, then you need to learn how to stay grounded, right? While holding those deep passions in and literally not losing your head. And it's not about avoiding that intensity. It's about someone that can hold it all in without, blowing a gasket and losing their head. So that's Algol, which is a really, really unique one. And it's one that I tend to look at, pretty quickly in someone's chart after I get through the everyday, major players. Let's talk Ceres. So Ceres is technically an asteroid. It's, I think, the largest asteroid. In fact, it's a dwarf planet, is what it's considered. But it resides in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And in astrology, it plays a much more personal role than you might originally think. Ceres is a symbol of how you give, but also how you receive care. It's tied to nurturing and motherhood and emotional security, right? Also, themes of sustenance like food, and just the natural cycles of withdrawal and comfort. And Ceres shows what makes you emotionally full, right? And what happens when that gets taken away. Now, in mythology, Ceres is based on the Roman goddess of agriculture, equivalent to the Greek goddess Demeter. Her most well known myth centers on the abduction of her daughter Persephone into the underworld. And in her grief, Ceres stopped all growth on Earth until Persephone was returned. And the story gives Ceres its deep connection to grief and separation, but also reunion, right? And that fierce love of a caregiver, of a nurturer who feels powerless. And in your chart, or anyone's chart, Ceres doesn't just show up as soft nurturing. It shows how you cope with absence and how you show up again when it's actually time to rebuild it. So in a chart, Ceres shows your caregiving style, what kind of nurturing that you offer others, but also the kind that you need in return to feel just as equally emotionally nourished. And it also speaks to your relationship with the body, your parents, food, as I said, and just how you handle emotional or even physical deprivation. So if you had Ceres in Cancer, you likely feel most nurtured in safe, emotionally close settings, right? But if you had it in Aquarius, your style could be more detached, right? You may show love more by responding and respecting people's independence, and you may need freedom yourself in order to feel emotionally healthy. Now, when Ceres gets activated within a natal chart, you may go through periods of heightened caregiving or emotional burnout or even issues around food or health. It can also be associated with grief and, the process of healing from it. So to help bring this to life, just to share a quick example, if somebody had Ceres in their fourth house, right, this would be someone that nurtures, privately. They'd be an emotional caregiver within the home. And maybe they grew up in an emotionally complex home you know, where care came with some form of strings attached or, intensity. But as an adult, they would grow to show love by offering deep loyalty and protection within the home. And it could just as easily turn into themes of, control or fear of abandonment when it comes to their loved ones within the home. And they may need to heal or feel like they need to emotionally save their family in some way. But it would really just be to break this cycle that they went through where they never really got the nurturing that they wanted to begin with. So while Ceres is not as impactful as like the sun in your chart, or as maybe not as emotionally powerful and resonant as the moon, in its own way, it tells you a lot about how you love and how you cope when that love is threatened, and just the type of emotional sustenance that you need in order to stay grounded. So, if you ever wondered why certain nurturing styles, right, don't necessarily fit you as opposed to somebody else, or why certain roles of caregiving maybe make you feel emotionally drained, it's probably not uncommon to look and see that Ceres is part of that equation in some way. Okay, next up, Pallas Athena. So, Pallas is one of the largest asteroids out there. And in astrology, it represents your capacity for wisdom, strategy, pattern recognition, and your creative intelligence. It's problem solving through strategy, but it's non-emotional. It's like very logic based, cold logic. So, where the moon might reflect your emotional instincts and where your passions flare, Pallas shows how you use logic, but also observation to make sense of the world. It's where you connect the dots and spot patterns, and then are able to make smart, probably subconscious or even intuitive choices based on that, especially in situations that require skill and diplomacy and strategy. Now, in mythology, Pallas Athena was the Greek goddess of wisdom and war strategy and justice, as well as crafts. And unlike, the chaotic, emotional side of war, Athena represented that calm, calculated side. Basically, brains over force. And she was born fully from Zeus's head, symbolizing pure mental clarity and deep strategic insight. And she's also associated with arts and crafts and weaving and things of that as well, but it's more a metaphor for finding some form of beauty through order and balance and planning, right? But in your chart or anybody's, Pallas shows how you approach problems intellectually. It's how you organize information and handle conflict and solve challenges with finesse, but really logic. And it really speaks to your overall sense of justice in the world, as well as your creative eye for structure, form, or aesthetics in some way, and how you manage situations or relationships without getting overly emotional. Now, in some cases, Pallas represents how you defend what's right, right? And because this is more brains over force, it wouldn't be through confrontation, but through, reason and logic and diplomacy and just, taking the right action at the right time. So, to help bring this to life, an example could be an individual who has Pallas Athena within maybe their third house. So somebody who had Pallas in their third house of communication would have a very sharp and logical mind for all things communication, right? And language and learning. They'd be able to solve problems by talking them out, or finding patterns within information and analyzing things from multiple angles. They'd naturally be good at writing or teaching anything that involves translating complex ideas into simple, easy to digest language. And, they would thrive in environments that required learning but also adapting. Um, and when things got messy in the third house, and whether in terms of communication or neighborhood or the siblings, they could be somebody that detaches emotionally and then starts to rationalize or intellectualize their way through the conflict rather than dealing with the feelings underneath. So, while Pallas isn't one of the planets, it does, I think you can see, reveal how you think and how you defend and how you naturally, your brain, without even consciously doing it, creates order out of chaos. So if you've wondered, like, why is it that you are able to solve problems differently than others, or why, you know, others can keep their cool in the situation, why maybe you get more emotional, it could be that Pallas is playing a part in one of your or both of your charts in that regard, because it helps explain your own unique approach to mental issues. Things that have to be processed through your mind is what I mean. And it's really useful when you start looking at patterns within your work or creativity or how you advocate for yourself. Obviously, depending upon where it falls in the chart, but it really does show where you bring some cold hard logic to a specific part of your day-to-day life. Next up, we're going to talk Juno. Juno is not only one of the major asteroids used in astrology, but it's also, in my opinion, one of the most important. And it represents your drive for commitment, as well as loyalty. It represents marriage and long term partnerships. So it shows what you truly need in those most important one on one bonds, not what attracts you in the moment or what makes you first get with somebody, but it's what makes a relationship last. It's what makes a relationship feel fair and emotionally, but also spiritually represents those ties that bind in a significant relationship. Juno, represents how you handle power dynamics in your closest partnerships. And this includes themes of compromise and jealousy, but maybe most importantly, expectations around equality in a relationship. Now, in mythology, Juno was the Roman counterpart of the Greek goddess Hera, right? The wife of Jupiter slash Zeus. So, while she was the queen of the gods, she was also known for enduring her husband's betrayals, and there were a lot of them, which connects Juno to those themes of loyalty and betrayal and just the complexity of staying committed. So, in your chart, Juno not only shows your ideal partner in a sense, but it also points to the kind of relational challenges that you're going to be asked to grow through, especially when it comes to fairness and devotion within an emotional relationship with a significant other. In your birth chart, Juno by sign and house shows the kind of partner that you're drawn to for the long haul, right? This isn't a boyfriend or a casual person that you date. This is the long-term person that you settle down with. And it shows the kind of traits or dynamics that you expect within a serious relationship. And it shows how you define commitment in your mind, intellectually, but also emotionally and physically, even spiritually. And ultimately shows what you're willing to tolerate or refuse in the name of staying bonded and staying together. So to bring this to life, an example could be somebody having Juno in their Libra 7th house, right? This would be a person that craved a balanced, equal, and harmonious relationship. You'd want a partner who respects your opinions or values fairness or is emotionally mature enough to compromise. And you'd feel most fulfilled in relationships that feel like a true partnership where both people contribute and nobody's dominating the other. And if things were to fall out of balance, though, you may become resentful or passive aggressive in some way. And there'd be a tendency in that partnership to prioritize peace over truth. So you may avoid conflicts in order to keep the harmony, even when deeper issues need to be addressed. Now, another way this could play out would be having Juno in your first house. And say you had Aries on the cusp. So this would say that you need a partner who respects your independence but also your passion. Someone who sees you as strong and assertive and capable, right? You might be drawn to bold and fiery personalities, or you may play that role yourself within the relationship. And you're not going to do well in restrictive partnerships with this placement or anything too traditional. For you, Juno and commitment has to come with freedom, but also mutual respect for both of yours individuality. And if your needs are dismissed or you start to feel like you're being controlled by the other, you'll pull away and fight to reclaim your own personal autonomy and identity. So there's a strong tendency or desire to want to lead in a relationship with this Juno placement, which could cause friction if you're with someone who also wants to dominate. So that's just another example. And like I said, while Juno isn't this major planet or celestial body, it does help to shed some light on, your partnership patterns, what you're really looking for in love, and what you'll fight for in love, but also what dynamics are likely to show up within those long-term, serious, committed relationships. So if you've ever wondered why certain partnerships feel right while others could leave you feeling more frustrated, your Juno placement could have, something to do with that. Next, we're going to talk Vesta. So Vesta's one of the 4 major asteroids used in astrology, I'd say, and it represents your capacity for devotion and sacred work and just the inner spiritual fire that you carry. Vesta shows where you can channel deep concentration but also deep commitment, often in ways that are private or purposeful. And it speaks to the part of you that can sacrifice comfort for long-term purpose in your life. And it allows you to retreat from distraction in order to protect something sacred, right? Whether that thing that's sacred is your work, your beliefs, or even your own personal space. And in mythology, Vesta was the Roman goddess of the hearth and home, right? The Greek version of Hestia. And she wasn't concerned with marriage or drama like the other goddesses. Instead, she kept the sacred flame, right? The sacred flame of Vesta, burning at the center of temples and homes. And Vesta's role was to maintain this purity and warmth and order, often through service and solitude and inner focus. That's why in astrology, Vesta can show where it is you're most devoted to something. Sometimes even to the point of isolation or self-denial. It'd be where you put, the service of something bigger than yourself in front of everything else. It shows where you can be incredibly dedicated in your chart, either to a cause, a belief system, or a role, but regardless, it's going to require a level of discipline. And it shows what you consider sacred in your life and where you need that uninterrupted space to dedicate towards it. And sometimes Vesta points to areas where you've made sacrifices in life, especially emotional ones, and where you've chosen your path over connection with others. So to help bring this to life, I'll paint a picture of an example, right? Let's say somebody had Vesta in their second house. Now, they may be deeply devoted to building stability and protecting their resources or perfecting a craft that brings them security. And they'd be the type of person who would put in long hours mastering something, whether it was, managing finances or woodworking, right? It doesn't matter, some second house theme. And because the process itself feels grounded, that's the pleasure they get from it. And they would hold strong values around money and beauty or the body. And they could see these areas as sacred to them. And even on the flip side, they could be somebody that has a very complicated relationship with comfort or pleasure, right? Swinging between indulgence and extreme discipline when it comes to their physical or material securities in some way. Now, if a person, for example, had Vesta in their 12th house, then they'd be quietly and powerfully devoted to their spiritual practice or healing or working behind the scenes in some way, right? For them, their inner life would be sacred, and they'd feel most alive when in solitude or meditating or dreaming or creating in silence, any of these 12th house themes. And there'd be a deep well of compassion here, right? They'd be someone that was drawn to helping others in these quiet, anonymous ways, like spiritual counseling or service. But they'd also need time alone to recharge. And if it was ignored, it could lead to things like burnout or isolation or feeling invisible. Now, even though Vesta is subtle, it can be one of the strongest placements when it comes to dedication and purpose and inner strength. It's a key marker for that. And it helps you see what you're willing to protect at all costs. It's what you're here to serve and how you create boundaries that keep that sacred fire burning. So if you've ever felt pulled towards a cause or a path with really sharp focus, then it could be Vesta working at that within your chart. Well, thanks for sticking with me through this one and tuning in. That's it for today's breakdown of some asteroids and fixed stars within astrology. And if one of these points shows up strongly in your chart, drop a comment, let us know, because it can reveal something powerful and often overlooked by a lot of folks. And if you're curious about how these energies show up in your own life, in your own chart, all booking information for personal readings are below. And lastly, if you found this helpful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more than you know. And I really do put a lot into these breakdowns and trying to make them easy to apply to your own chart and your own life. And as I said, this was suggested from folks in some of the comments. So if you have other ideas or concepts for videos that you'd like to see, please post them and let me know. It's always a great source of inspiration. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.